Hi everyone, my name is Melissa Evans. This is my Module 14 case study for EDL 851. So a summary of this case, I am an administrator in a building and I would like to non-renew a teacher to prevent her from receiving tenure. This decision is based off frequent classroom visits showing she's struggling. She's struggling with classroom management. She is also unwilling to change and unresponsive to suggestions I've given her. Mrs. Stevens, the teacher we're discussing, is upset and she's threatening legal action should I decide to non-renew her contract. Potential ethical and legal issues here. Mrs. Stevens is threatening to take this issue to court based on the fact she says I offered no practical ideas. She said that neither did her supervisor. She received unhelpful supervision and she felt like the evaluation was unfair. It would be helpful here to know what state we're dealing with, if we're dealing with Kansas, if it's in another state. I had a hard time assuming this was a Kansas issue just because Kansas has gotten rid of tenure. So I'm curious what state requirements are for evaluations here. And I also feel like the evaluation form, she kind of has some grounds as far as an unfair evaluation goes, because the evaluation form used to evaluate her was not awesome. Issues I had with it as someone who would be using that evaluation form, one of the things she was evaluated on was her personality, and it offered nothing else but personality. And I believe as the administrator there, I marked below average. What a subjective, generalized idea to be evaluating someone on. And so I felt like it kind of had some grounds there when she was saying it was an unfair evaluation. So that's something to consider, what kind of tools we're using to evaluate our teachers. Synthesis of this case study. I have a teacher I feel is ineffective and unwilling to make changes, and I do not want to renew her contract, but she's threatening to take me to court if I mark her evaluation as non-renew. Important information here, starting with people, what we know. Mrs. Stevens is the teacher I'm wanting to non-renew. I am renewing all my other new hires. All interactions that took place between myself and Mrs. Stevens were all one-on-one conversations based on the information given in the case study. I think that's important to note, that it was all happening between two people, and it can very easily turn into a he said, she said, which is a very big deal. What is unknown? What I would like to know in this case study when determining how I would handle it from here, Mrs. Stevens, in the information given, mentioned another supervisor. So I'm curious who that other supervisor was. I'm curious if it was an instructional coach. Is there an instructional coach in my building? Is there someone that was working with Mrs. Stevens besides myself to help make her more effective? And I was also curious if there's anyone else in Mrs. Stevens' room throughout the day, whether it be a para, whether it be a co-teacher, someone else who is in there that could just verify either what she is saying or what I'm saying. So it's not just a he said, she said thing. Important information as far as place goes. What we know is that the observations took place in Mrs. Stevens' room. We also know that I met with her in my office to give her her final evaluation, and where the interaction about taking this potentially to court took place in my office as well. What I think would be helpful to know about the school is how large the school is, what school age, whether it's an elementary, a middle school, a high school, what are the demographics of the school would be really helpful, especially because right now I know in Kansas, Western Kansas, they're struggling to fill positions. And so when you're considering whether you're going to keep a teacher on or let them go or non-renew their contract, how difficult it is to fill spots is something to consider. Important information, programs. What we know, what was mentioned in the case study was that Mrs. Stevens is intelligent and she has an excellent background in her subject matter. The fact they talked about her subject matter makes me think that maybe it's a middle school or a high school. What is unknown? We don't know what grade level she teaches. We don't know what subject matter she teaches. I would like to know if there's an instructional coach there. That would really help me figure out, is she just not taking information I'm giving her in passing, or is there more of a formal sit down with an instructional coach or myself that says, hey, here are some things we want to see you try, as opposed to just maybe you could try this, where it's a suggestion and not something that I'm telling you I want implemented in your classroom. And the other thing, what is unknown, is who the other supervisor was that she referenced when we were meeting in my office. What to consider here, I mentioned this just a little bit earlier. If it's a rural area, hard to fill positions. I know, being a high school mathematics teacher, I'm contacted frequently about job openings because that particular job, that discipline being taught, is hard to fill right now. So that's something to consider if I want to non-renew her. Is she involved in other programs in the school or community? I know at our high school, it's a really large high school, we have so many teachers who are so active outside of their classroom, but still in our school and our community, with Stuco, with our Briny Birds, with IB programs, with different clubs that they've established, working with communities that care. So it's something to consider when you're talking about non-renewing a teacher in the classroom. A lot of times the roles they play aren't just specific to their classroom. A lot of times teachers have their hands in a lot of other aspects. So that's something to consider when deciding if you want to bring someone back or not. I also want to know if I've talked to maybe the department head, since they mentioned her subject matter. I was curious if maybe she was a middle school or high school teacher who had a department head that might have some information in regards to how she's teaching and suggestions. If there's an assistant principal, if there's an instructional coach, an HR person. I feel like anytime you want to non-renew someone, there should be multiple people consulted, not just because like I want your say and what you say goes, but because your input is valuable and one person's perspective isn't near as broad as listening to 4 or 5 other people who have ideas and who maybe have suggestions there. I want to know if I followed the protocols with evaluations. I know when thinking about my school, I spoke with an assistant principal about this case study, and he mentioned that if we mark, we are evaluated with a rubric, and if we mark 2 or more below average, that teacher is immediately put on a plan of improvement. And so I'm curious if that was a thing at this school where I am the principal right now. Did I follow the protocols with evaluations? Did I cover everything I needed to? And I want to know what the tenure laws are in my state. Potential options here. So obviously you can start with the most extreme, where I can reverse my decision and renew Mrs. Stevens' contract. I can stand by my decision to non-renew Mrs. Stevens and let the district office know she's threatened legal action. Or 3, I could put a contingency on her renewal that she follow a plan of improvement. When I'm considering these different options, if I decide to reverse my decision and renew her contract, I feel like if I just say, okay, you threaten legal action, I'm going to renew you because I don't want to get my school into any kind of legal issues, that could possibly lead to future power struggles. And I say that, and I hate saying that, because I never want it to be, I'm an administrator, I'm exerting my power over you. That's not to me a good leader, and not the kind of leader I want to be. But I do think if you have a teacher who's going against what you're saying and you have your mind made up, and the second they threaten legal action, you just totally revert. I feel like that you kind of lose your negotiating abilities, I guess. And I think other people around you see that as well. I also feel like if I just completely reverse my decision with no plan of action, there's no change, and that's not what's best for kids. Based off what I'm seeing in classroom observations, something needs to change there, and not just because that's what I'm saying, but because that's what's best for the students in the classroom. So to reverse my decision without any change isn't doing what's best for our students, and that's the ultimate goal there. If I do reverse my decision, that will hopefully prevent legal issues. I think that would be the only reason I would decide to do that. 2, looking at my option number 2, sticking to my decision and non-renewing her contract. Obviously, this could lead to potential legal issues since she threatened as much. Also, would it be hard to find a replacement for her? I mentioned it earlier, but if she's in a role that we're having trouble filling those positions, deciding to non-renew her might get rid of programs she's involved in. We might not be able to fill her spot and offer the courses she's teaching. But on the same end, you might possibly find a great replacement for her. So it's kind of a gamble in that area. When considering the third option, if I sit her down and say, okay, we're going to renew your contract contingent on you working on a plan of improvement, I feel like this covers legal issues, because I'm giving her the option to improve, I'm giving her a chance here. But it also, as I mentioned in B, it gives me an opportunity to collect data. I feel like that's kind of somewhere where I dropped the ball earlier in this. It felt like everything mentioned in the case study was me just kind of evaluating my head. Oh, I don't feel like she's doing well. That's it. I'm just not going to renew her. And we know how important data is, not just for our students, but for our teachers as well. So by putting her on a plan of improvement, that gives me an opportunity to collect data that either one supports me non-renewing her, saying she's really not trying and it's not working out, or it's going to support that, yeah, she is trying. She's trying to implement these changes that we're asking her to make. And so we should keep her on. I also said that it's proactive and doing what's best for kids. This requires some type of change because based on what I'm seeing, something needs to change. So a plan of improvement will hopefully be a catalyst to that change. I don't know if this is possible. I don't know if you're allowed to say renewed contingent on a plan of improvement. Um, so that would be something to look into. Can I get her to buy into the plan of improvement? So I think, and I kind of mentioned it in the next one after that, who helps develop the plan. But it seems like I don't have a great relationship with Mrs. Stevens. And so when it comes to developing this plan of improvement, I think it's crucial that I get her input on it and I get someone who's not me's input on it because I feel like I haven't established that relationship. So ideally, maybe someone who teaches the same subject she does, or if she's elementary, someone on the same grade level can bring in and say, here are some things I'm doing. Maybe you could put this in there. An instructional coach to say, okay, I'll come in and track your OTRs. I'll do something that says, okay, we're working to get better here. We're working to build capacity. And if I haven't established that great of a relationship with her, which is an issue for me already, I don't like that I haven't done that, but I can't go back and change that right now. So for future reference. But if I haven't established that relationship with her where she trusts that I want to do what's best for her as an educator as well, I think it's super helpful to have someone who's a neutral party come in and say, okay, here are some things we can do. So that way it's not coming from me who she already distrusts. Have I completed this evaluation with enough time left for a plan of improvement? This was another thing where it said in the case study that I was kind of scrambling to submit these by the time I needed to, which makes me feel like maybe I'm so late in the game that a plan of improvement isn't even an option at this point, but I'm hoping there are a lot of things I did that I don't like in this case study as the administrator. But I'm hoping that I at least completed this evaluation with enough time for her to show some type of buy-in on a plan of improvement and an attempt to get better. To me, the best option here would be to renew her contract with a contingency that we develop and use a plan of improvement. This gives her, like I mentioned earlier, it gives her the opportunity to show a willingness to try to improve and increase her teaching capacity. It creates the opportunity to gather data to support either decision we make at the end. And this ultimately is what's best for kids. Some type of change is happening where we see change needs to happen, whether it be she's working to improve on her classroom management skills, or whether it be we're collecting data that say we need to find someone else that would be a better fit here in our school. When it comes to implementing this decision, I think the first step here, one of the things that really stands out to me in this case study is the fact that it is all falling on me and not in a I can't handle it kind of way, but in a this is very top down leadership to me, and I don't like that. I don't like that I'm the sole decision maker there. If I want my school to feel like a family and I want everyone to feel like a stakeholder, I feel like not that teachers are going to evaluate other teachers or have a decision in who stays and goes, but I think there has to be someone else involved here. There has to be multiple people involved here. And so consulting the district office as far as seeking advice, confirming what are viable options in this situation, and making sure what I'm doing aligns with our district policies. If I go ahead and I get the okay that contingent on a plan of improvement is a viable option, then the next step would be to present the option to Mrs. Stevens. When I present it to her, I need to make sure that I'm presenting in a way that is not condescending. It's not saying do this or you're fired. But if I really do want to help her improve, then I need to present it that way and be genuinely hoping and be genuine in the way I present it, that I want to help her improve. I think the next step would be to develop that plan of improvement with Mrs. Stevens, with an instructional coach, with other resources available in the district. Step 4 would be to follow up regularly on implementation to give timely feedback. One of the things Mrs. Stevens said when she was threatening legal action was that the suggestions weren't awesome. That's not verbatim, but she was basically saying that she wasn't given great advice. She wasn't given great instructions. She felt like they were unfair and it was just a snapshot of what she was doing, and it was coming from sources who weren't credible to help her improve. And so recognizing that she's already fighting that You have to be really cautious about how you deliver this, and then follow up with her regularly. I know that there have been times when I've been evaluated and I've said in that evaluation, here's where I want to improve. And then no one ever followed up with me, and I didn't hold myself accountable after a couple of weeks. So I think following up regularly to give timely feedback and say, okay, this is working, keep going, or to say, okay, you know what, that's not working, let's try something else. So I think timely feedback is huge here. Step 5, if successfully following the plan, I would go ahead and renew her contract. She's showing me she wants to improve, and especially if she's going to do that after we've already had some words, that tells me she wants to improve. And I think just like with students, we don't give up on them. With teachers, it would be if they're showing me they're trying, I would keep them on. And if she's not following the plan, if she's still obstinate and deciding that she knows what's best and not taking suggestions, then I wouldn't renew her contract. I put number 7 in all caps because I think this is huge. Get a new evaluation tool. We've learned in this class there should be multiple ways that you handle an evaluation, from classroom observations, from peer observations, from different tools, rubrics. We know there are several different ways to evaluate teachers. And so the fact that the one evaluation tool that we're given in this case study that they used is so poorly formatted as far as how's her personality, and it just was not a great evaluation tool. So I think that we need to find a much better way to evaluate teachers in my building for future reference.